Hi, my name is Mattia Murray, and welcome to The Longer Road. You are on the longer road if you have multiple intersectional identities that are often marginalized. You've had to work harder to get to the starting line, and you might feel behind. I'm here to provide hope, support, and practical tips, and to let you know that you're not alone. Welcome to my guest, Carlos DelaPlaya. He is an incredible coach and public figure, and I'm just going to go ahead and say gay icon, who has his own amazing podcast as well. I am so excited to have him here today, and I'm also going to let Carlos introduce himself.
Wow, gay icon. That's the first time I've heard someone call me a public figure. And it really tickled the part of me that wants to be super famous. So thanks for saying that. I'm a life coach. Pretty much within my life coaching journey, I've been a general life coach and still consider myself one. Yet these days, I find that playfulness, mysticism, mystery, self-expression, taking up space are often shame, and things like that are what I most coach on. I'm obsessed with self-expression and helping people understand it in their own way. Mostly myself, though. Like, I started this journey because I wanted to be like a huge guinea pig of myself. Did that even make sense? I trusted it. And I figured that while I'm on the journey, I would also like support people and share my story. Yeah, that's me.
Yay. And can you just tell us a little bit about your podcast? Because I am obsessed with it.
Oh my God, thanks for saying that. So I have a podcast called the Spiritual Thirst Trap Podcast. So I love to explain to people what a thirst trap is, because a lot of people don't know, surprisingly. A thirst trap, think of the word trap. When you're trapping, like let's say you're out hunting and you set like a bear trap or something, right? That's a weird example, but the idea is that that trap is supposed to capture the bear, right? And what thirst means is sort of like that part of us that's like horny or desires sex or that gets turned on. And so a thirst trap is a post that we make on social media with the intention of trapping someone's thirst. I love personally taking thirst traps, I love feeling sexy in my own body. I think it's such a gift to feel that. I think it's such a portal to confidence. It's such a portal to healing. It's such a portal to releasing shame and trauma, to feel sexy in your own body and empowered in that. And a lot of people think that thirst traps are like quote unquote low vibrational, whatever the hell that even means. And I believe thirst traps are sacred as fuck. And I believe that any form of expression that we do, even if it's perceived as cringy by others, is sacred and beautiful and right, including thirst traps. So I decided to I also think that the word spiritual is used a lot to also put people in these boxes and rule books like, oh, it's spiritual if you meditate every day, or it's spiritual if, and there's all these like fake rules. So I was like going to play along with that and call a thirst trap spiritual. And it's really like a joke more than anything. This podcast is a self-improvement sort of podcast, or a self-actualization podcast that's designed to help you like really live a life that you're turned on by, whatever that means to you, and to literally and in the process, like have fun. It's not this like copy and paste sort of like, all right, when I reach this goal, then I'll be happy sort of like thing that I see a lot in self-improvement spaces. It's really like learning how to romanticize the journey, be turned on by your journey in more than one way, if you catch my drift, in a mischievous, playful, unfiltered way. It is explicit. I curse a lot. I talk about sex on that show too. I haven't talked about sex yet, but it's coming. Pun intended, it's coming.
Yeah. I have to mark this podcast explicit. I just mark it explicit every episode by default because I swear, and I don't make too many explicit sex references. Although this is actually okay. This is a fun one for you because you would totally have already posted this by now. I had this thought the other day. I've had a couple friends ask me recently how my relationship is so healthy, which is so funny to me because I've had a lot of tumultuous relationships. So I've been in my main nesting partner whom I live with, I've been with for over 5 years, and it is a very healthy relationship. And I was like, oh wow, people are asking me this. And I was like, yeah, in all seriousness, part of why the relationship is so healthy is because when I had a full hysterectomy and my cervix was removed, I was reshaped to be just exactly big enough to take my partner's big dick, just barely. And I was like, oh, I could totally make this video about how like I have a custom made pocket for this big wallet to
Mattia.
Anyway, I haven't done that yet, but I thought it was very funny.
Yeah, it is funny, and it's probably like also true. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, sex is amazing, and I think we should, like, we being whoever resonates with what I'm saying, take what resonates, leave the rest behind. We should, quote unquote, be willing and open to talking about sex instead of making it this like mystery that's like taboo. And no.
Yeah.
No, thanks.
And speaking of which, social media is still to a large degree, I know at least Instagram, like sex coaches on Instagram have to, and sex therapists on Instagram have to, like, they do like S-X because any post with the word sex in it can get banned or get them shadow banned. And I just think that is so wild because it's such a basic part of life for so many people. Anyway, so that brings me back to like, I know one of the things you're so amazing about is shame. And that's I think about that topic a lot. And I'm really, really curious what this journey was like for you, whether you was that something you were dealing with? Is that why that ended up being part of your work? And like, how did you kind of work through that with all these societal messages?
Such a good question. Yeah, shame. I really do see shame as sort of like this mind virus that maybe like 99% arbitrary statistic of people experience, and some of them don't even realize it. Like, they go to their deathbed. And shame, what it does is it's sort of like this mask. It's sort of a filter that our genius gets filtered through to other people so that we're more like palatable, digestible, we stir the pot less. And shame isn't something that we're born with. It's taught. Shame says my beingness there's something wrong with it and it needs to be fixed. Shame really says, like, if you believe in God, I believe in God. Like, God fucked up making me, so I need to fix this. Like,
Oh my God.
hello, can we just listen to like the preposterousness of that statement? Like, dogs, if you look at a dog, are dogs going like, damn, the way that I bark is too much, like I need to fix it? No, dogs aren't doing that. Peacocks aren't like growing less feathers because somebody's thought they're too much, right? Like, shame is a perspective that's injected into the consciousness of our society from a very young age. And we actually live in systems that perpetuate, teach it, reward it, romanticize it. And yeah, to answer your question, shame is literally probably the mind virus that most plagued me growing up. You know, as a gay man who is quite queer, who also has parts of me that present in a very feminine, beautiful way, and is very spiritual, very weird, intense, very nerdy, and what people would call hypersexual. But even the word hyper suggests that my level of sexuality or expressing my sensual energy is too much, right? So growing up, everything that I did was filtered through this lens of shame. And I know that a lot of queer folks probably resonate with this, but everything I was constantly like metaphorically and sometimes literally looking over my shoulder to see if someone would catch the gay that comes out of me, and like filtering it, hiding it, diminishing it, trying to squeeze it out of my body. And specifically, it was with sexuality. And then after coming out of the closet of sexuality, it was with spirituality that I felt very in the closet about for many years as well. I went through college, joined a fraternity, was a student leader, all these things in the closet. So like for the first 24 years of my life, I lived my life, half of my life in secrecy. And it was so fucking exhausting, you know, and stressful and anxiety inducing, you know. And there are people that I was around that were highly intuitive that knew, and they would very gently be like, hey, like they would ask questions. And I would go into a fight or flight response, avoid the conversation, deflect it, run away. And at the time, like I didn't understand because I was so in it, how much I just viewed my existence as like wrong or like an abomination almost. You know, I started to really be seen by more people. And I started becoming fascinated with this idea of like self-improvement, even though the way that I approach it is completely different now. But I started to want to take up more space and want to heal and want to cultivate emotional intelligence. And I came out at like this retreat that one of the exercises is to ruin your reputation on purpose and to confess things that you don't want people to know about you. And that exercise right there alone is worth more than $1 million. Like, ruin your reputation on purpose. Everything you think would get you completely canceled or rejected from the tribe, like share it on purpose. Get yourself canceled on purpose, right? Like ruin your reputation on purpose. And it was through that exercise that I started to slowly feel safe to take up space with my sexuality. And you know, in that moment, like at this retreat, I remember being in the middle of a circle of like 30 people. I was like sobbing in the middle of this circle. Like it felt like I was dying because imagine like 24 years of hiding. Like I'm coming face to face with like, actually, I didn't have to do that. And sort of the shame that's on top of that of like, damn, like I was surrounded by people who would have kept loving me had I came out. So all this pretending was for nothing. And like, that was really hard to face. There was also at the same time, this other part of me that felt like a lion, like a king, like a part of my nervous system that fucking awakened. It felt like golden fire. It felt like that part of me that's connected to God, like that hose, instead of being like the thickness of a pencil, it was like the thickness of a fire hose now. And I got up and I felt power and I looked everyone in the eyes and I was like, wearing this mask of pretending is fucking heavy and I'm done fucking performing for other people. And, you know, after that, I became obsessed with self-expression. And then I came out of the closet of my nerdiness and the part of me that's a gamer and the part of me that likes to smoke weed and have drinks sometimes. Like I started just coming out in all areas of my life. Now I'm here with you, Mattia.
Yay. Yeah, I wasn't even thinking of that consciously, but the posts that you make where you post, you know, images from anime or something that like go along with what you're saying, I love those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, literally, I thought no one would get it. I thought people would all unfollow me. I thought that my nerdiness would be seen as repulsive. And then I was like, wait, but what if like I just purposely push people away? Let me just experiment with it. And so many people that I would have never guessed are like, oh my God, you love anime too? You're giving me permission to be myself. Thank you. I thought I had to hide this. And I started making more money. And literally now, like in my first group program ever, people are using references of anime to like create concepts of breakthrough. And I'm like, holy fuck, I'm getting paid to like gamify life and talk about quests and talk about your aligning your jutsus and shit. And like, it's all within the frame of like self-actualization, whatever that even means too, but like saying yes to you, self-expression. Wow. No place I'd rather be.
Yay. So I do want to ask, just because I have been on a pretty similar journey, I feel like over time of just like being bigger, brighter, taking up more space. Like I loved the lion imagery. And that is not to say that it's a totally linear path, right? In terms of, so I'm really curious to hear if either you have times where you've been expressing yourself and you felt like it did not go the way you wanted it to, like more recently. So in showing that this is like a nonlinear path, or if it's like, oh no, the external stuff has all been 100% great, but my internal experience of it, like whatever you're still working through, if that comes up for you still, or if maybe you're just like totally past it, fully enlightened.
I actually really love that question, Mattia, because I think it can be easy to hear the story I just said and been like, oh, Carlos arrived to the destination. And newsflash, when I quote unquote arrived at this destination, I was hit with literally the worst depression I've ever had in my life. Like I'm talking psycho-spiritual death. Like I thought I was going crazy at one point. And that's just one of many challenges that come up. But what happened was when I first started taking up space in this way, there was a part of me that was taking up space in a performative way also. So it was like, I went so far to the other side of the spectrum that instead of performing as like this closeted individual, now I'm performing as this like almost overly bold. And there were parts of it that felt cringy, not because it was a bad thing or anything, but because it was still performative and people pleasing in nature. And this depression that sort of brought me to my knees, like literally and metaphorically. And I also sprained both ankles at the same time. It was like back to back to back, like shitty things happening, forced me to really take a look at where else in my life I was lying or performing. And, you know, I used to wear like outfits and I would mismatch patterns on purpose. And it was actually really inauthentic. I would mismatch patterns to break rules on purpose and like almost piss people off on purpose. But it wasn't really who I am. And then I also forced myself to be louder when I actually didn't want to speak. Right. So taking up space in a clean way, which is like what I sort of help people do as well, is understanding that taking up space isn't necessarily about dressing brighter or being on stage or having a large audience or being louder or more charismatic. It's about saying yes to you. And when you say yes to you, including those parts of us that aren't seen as confident, as expressive, or maybe even seen as weird or outcasted in society, when you could learn to say yes to those parts and also integrate those parts of your psyche, some people call this the shadow, right? Like, then you actually take up even more space than the person who's like performing as bold. I started stepping into what I would call like my dark prince era, and like, which was me taking up space and speaking, yet only when I wanted to. And if I didn't want to dress up all the way, then I wouldn't. And if I didn't feel like contributing to the conversation or posting or performing, then I wouldn't. And it was more about letting go. So it was like at first, when I first started like sort of coming out into this more expressed taking up space entity, it was very external, which was necessary. It wasn't a bad thing. It was very necessary and healthy. And I needed to do that experiment. And then after that, I bounced back into this like, okay, how can I take up more space by letting go more, by speaking less, by going inward rather than only focusing on the external? And this is continuing to unfold. Like even to this day, Mattia, like there's still moments where I can like where I'm posting or creating content and I'm thinking about somebody that I'm wanting to impress. That's not even like my content isn't even for them. And like there's this voice that's like, but what if they reject you or abandon you? Right. And it's a constant sort of recalibration to like, actually, I'm not ready to be exposed to that rejection or abandonment. So I am going to put the filter on here. That's being authentic when you can own that you're not ready to handle the next level. Like that's so authentic. And that's so much more courageous than someone who's pretending to be authentic. Right. And then like being willing to take emotional risks when my nervous system can handle it. Like, actually, yeah, I see that I'm trying to impress this person and this is my truth. I'm going to put it without filter. And if I lose them, I'm going to have my own back because I've got me. And if I've got me, then I don't need them. It would be nice to get their validation and their love, and I own that I want it. And I trust that if I lose them, it's because there's something better and more aligned coming for me, right? Whether that's like a partner that I'm trying to attract or clients or whatever it is, you know. And for me, where I would say my work is in my own medicine is in dating. Like I'm continuing to catch where I'm like trying to come off as like less spiritual or so that I don't push somebody away, or where I'm trying to like curse less because I want them to think that I'm like, right. And I'm noticing it and I'm like, actually, no, let's repel them. Not repel them on purpose as in make it my mission to repel them, but repel them on purpose if my truth repels them. Like that's actually a win, right? Like,
I love that.
I call them spicy wins, actually.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I saw you posted about that. Okay, talk about spicy wins because I love that.
Yeah. So any goal that we set in our life, we on the way to the goal, like there's a journey that involves high highs, low lows, and everything in between. It's not linear. So if you're setting a goal to find a soulmate that loves you as you are, who you are, that has similar values to you, that you have bomb ass sex with, whatever, the goal isn't to get everybody to like you. The goal is to actually repel anybody who isn't that person. If you really think about it, right? But what happens is people start going on dates and they repel someone that they like or that they want to like them, and they think that something went wrong, and it feels like shit, right? They think that they failed, and really what that is a spicy win because you repelled the person that's not your person. So you literally factually speaking, you got closer to understanding what you won't tolerate, understanding what you're looking for, and you repelled someone who didn't match that, right? This is called a spicy win. Same thing, like I'm going to use an example of like, let's say you're a content creator or a life coach, or, you know, you're somebody who's building an online brand, right? Like anytime you post your truth and you lose followers, that's a spicy win. Anytime you post something that felt edgy, but it was your truth, and it's a truth that turned you on from the inside and out, and it was a little scary, and you got hate comments on it, or someone tried to cancel you, that's what I would call like a spicy win. Because the idea is it's spicy because it's uncomfortable. It's something that can feel like failure, and it's part of sort of when we're on our way to that goal, whatever that is. It's part of like I like to use this metaphor of like forging a sword, right? In order to forge a sword, it's put inside like this forge that has super hot melting temperatures, and then this blacksmith starts hitting it with the hammer. Each hammer hit, each time it's dipped into the forge, that's a spicy win. But then when you put the sword into like the cold water to cool it down or whatever, that's like the pleasurable moments, right? And it's literally like whenever you're manifesting or on your way to a desired outcome, whatever that is, it's a process of becoming the person that can like hold that thing, like energetically speaking, because I love talking about energetics too. It's like in order to get to where you want to go, you have to let go of the things that are repelling that thing that's uncomfortable. That's a spicy win. You have to be willing to let go and be in that emptiness, that uncertainty of not knowing, and take risks. All of this can count as like a spicy win. And you need the spicy wins. Like there's if you're not having spicy wins, then you're not showing up. You're not on the hero's journey.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. So I know uncertainty, I've seen listed as one of the most uncomfortable. I don't know if it's actually an emotion, but the experience of uncertainty is one of the most uncomfortable for a lot of humans. Some people like it, but a lot of people do not. And I'm loving also something you said about basically, having your own, supporting yourself, having your own back when things don't go well, or when you're having, as you've now dubbed it, a spicy win. I love that as well. How, I would love for you to talk more about details of what you do to support yourself when you're in these experiences. And that could be around the uncertainty. It could be around, again, you having something just not go the way you want it, or feeling that rejection. What do you do to actually support yourself in those moments when those big feelings are coming up?
Oof. Your questions are so good. Oh my God. Okay. Yeah. So there's quite a few ways that I like to approach it. And as always, like to anyone listening to this, take what resonates, leave the rest behind, try on a tool. If it doesn't fit right, then it ain't for you, and that's okay, right? One thing I've been experimenting with a lot lately that has been really working for me is it's like the spicier feelings or the more uncomfortable feelings. Like when I feel the sensation actually happening in my nervous system, is to romanticize it, intensify it, turn the volume up on it, and literally almost imagine like I'm riding that feeling's dick. Okay. And like, let's say I'm feeling a lot of self-doubt because I'm being interviewed, or I'm going on a date with someone who really, like, I think they're just better than me, and I'm putting them on a pedestal. Like that part of me that's spinning out in doubt and in insufficiency, instead of being like, well, Carlos, you shouldn't feel that way. Like, put yourself on the pedestal too. Come on, love and light. Like, I am confident, like saying that even though you don't feel it. Like, I literally imagine that voice of doubt, of insecurity, of insufficiency, of scarcity, of not enoughness is like someone I can have sex with. I intensify it. And I tell that voice, I'm like, yeah, come on, doubt, harder, choke me harder, doubt, choke me harder, judgment. And like something about that for some reason always gives me exactly what I want, because I'm not rejecting my experience. I'm actually owning that some part of me kind of likes being like choked by self-doubt. It starts to create this safety in my nervous system. Like I start moving out of fight or flight and into like rest and digest. And when you're in rest and digest on that side of the spectrum of like your nervous system state, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that's like associated with creativity, problem solving, visualization, confidence, and also the right side of your brain, also creativity, spirituality, etc. Blood flow starts going to these areas in your brain, and it's when there's literally blood flowing to those areas in your brain because you're in rest and digest that it's easier to actually be who you are. So ironically, the pathway into like fixing my insecurity in this sort of example was to ride the dick of my insecurity instead of like trying to affirm it away, right? And really how you do this is just like you recognize like, okay, in this moment, I'm sort of in this like trance of unworthiness. Tara Brach, one of my favorite teachers, calls it the trance of unworthiness. It's like recognize that you're in a state where you're closer to fight or flight, where you're at war with yourself. Recognize like, hey, right now I'm at war with myself. I'm feeling doubt, and name the feeling. I'm feeling doubt. I'm feeling nervousness. I'm feeling anxiety. I'm feeling insufficient, or I'm feeling needy, right? And then as you recognize the emotion and point out where it is in your body, I like to ask myself, where's the sensation like most living in my body? Maybe it's in your throat, maybe it's in your heart, maybe it's in your butthole, right? Like, and you literally just zoom into that feeling and then, and just allow it, that would be the second step, right? So you recognize it and name it and locate it. That's the first step. And then the second step is you allow it. This is just the life of the moment. This is where I'm at. This isn't a problem that needs to be fixed or changed. And then you investigate it. Investigating is literally just amplifying it, putting a magnifying glass on it. I like to give people a visual. Imagine you're taking an elevator from your head to the center of that tenderness and that feeling. Investigate it, right? And nurture. Nurture could be riding his dick. It could be looking at the feeling and saying, hey, you're not a problem that needs to be fixed. And I'm sorry for rejecting you, frustration, insufficiency. I'm sorry for trying to fix you. And inviting them to have a seat at the table with your other feelings, right? So, hey, anxiety, like, I want you to join me on this date with this person that intimidates me because I want you to actually need you. Because when I show up with you and with my other feelings, I'm being more who I am. And I'm creating more safety within this date. And I want to show you that even if they do abandon us, I'm still here. Whew.
Oh, yeah.
And, Tara Brach, that process, RAIN, recognize, allow, investigate, nurture, RAIN for short, was invented by Tara Brach. It's really what I use. And it's too long didn't read summary. You recognize you're at war with yourself, and that feeling that you're trying to fix, stop trying to fix it and like intensify it, turn up the volume on it, and then and ride its dick. Or if you're someone who's like penetrating the feeling, that too, imagine you're penetrating the feeling and the feeling's whispering in your ear, you're not good enough, right? Like while you're penetrating it, like dead ass, like that shit works, y'all. It works. And there's other tools as well, but that's like the first one that really came up here. Your question.
And if you want more of that content about what Carlos was just saying, listen to Carlos's podcast. It's so good.
Thanks, y'all. Like literally, like let yourself get turned on by the contrast. let yourself get turned on by sensation. What a lot of people, and this is hard, right? Like there's layers to it. I don't want y'all to think that I'm like perfect at this either. There's certain sensations that I'm still like, this is too much. No. Right.
Yeah.
But pain and pleasure, like we think of it as two separate things. But I like to tell people, like, imagine heads and tails. You can't take heads away from tails. It's one coin. So when you're feeling a painful or uncomfortable emotion, like uncertainty, to use the one that you said, Mattia, like, and you're saying yes to it, and you're like, uncertainty, get higher, fear, get more intense, anxiety, get more intense, show me more, give me more. Right? You are physically expanding your nervous system's capacity. Like I want you to imagine that inside your nervous system, there's a container of like water. And that container holds pain and pleasure in the same container. That container literally gets bigger when you expand your capacity to feel pain. It's the same thing with pleasure too, right? Like when you're feeling pleasure, there's a lot of people that when they're feeling a lot of pleasure, when it's too much, they're like, okay, now I need to go fuck something up, right? Like now I need to go like get blackout drunk and be super hungover so that I feel like shit. Or now I need to go get an injury, push it too hard at the gym. That's a big one for me. When I'm like making a lot of money, then suddenly my body hurts and I'm like, wait a damn minute.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's this container actually gets bigger when you're using sort of that rain process of really going into a feeling and amplifying it sensationally. Like you can do that with pleasure as well. It doesn't just have to be pain. That container gets bigger and you're experiencing more aliveness rather than like, okay, I can only handle this much pleasure. And right. I'm gonna just leave it at that.
Yeah. And actually I think sex is a perfect analogy to go along with this for how certainly one way that I have practiced being able to handle more feeling in general was not feeling safe around sex because of having been assaulted and having to go through this whole process of getting back to like, okay, this is safe, having to say to myself over and over, like, I'm safe in the moment. And a lot of times saying no when I actually kind of did want to say yes, because I was defaulting to protecting myself and staying safe. Yeah. And I literally had to regrow that capacity to hold pleasure because I was like, only this little, like to use the analogy of the bucket or whatever, like I had this like little cup and I was like, okay, I can hold this little cup of pleasure. And anything more than that is overwhelming and pushes me into a place that doesn't feel safe. And so that's kind of the other like side of this. I feel like is what we're balancing is not just pleasure and pain. It's like on one side is pleasure and pain and on the other side is our total, nervous system capacity or ability to feel safety, because both pleasure and pain can feel unsafe. And so really what we're doing is like building our safety for both, because on the pain side, what a lot of people believe is I can't handle it. Right? Like this is too much. This is too painful. I cannot handle this. And I totally get that. And also being, and again, not, you shouldn't push too much into that. Like I'm all about doing safety and like growing in little bits as you feel comfortable. And if this journey feels good to you and you like intensity and you want to be able to hold more pleasure, part of that is being able to handle or believe that you can handle anything that comes your way. And that's a very, very powerful and powerfully confident place to live from if you really believe you can handle anything.
Yeah, that is so good what you just said, because I could literally track moments in my life where I was sort of on the pain side of the spectrum. And like when I believe, and for me, physical body pain is one that shows up for me, and also just mental stability. Like what do I mean by that? Like when I'm in the pain side of like my mental health, like it can feel like I'm going crazy. And like actually when that thought comes up, that's like a good sign that I'm like hitting my threshold of my capacity to feel pain, is when like my nervous system's like, oh, you're going crazy, time to like numb this so that you don't go crazy. Like that's actually also wisdom. That's wisdom too, right? Like, because I'm talking about growth here, but also like I don't believe in just constantly growing. I believe in staying where you're at a little bit when that's right. And only you can decide when that's right. But you brought up a really valuable point. Like I don't want people to now listen to this and be like, okay, now I must skydive into the most painful shit and the most pleasurable shit and just overwhelm the fuck out of myself. Like I don't believe in that at all. My approach, it might be my Mars and Taurus speaking, but whatever. My approach is like stretch, not break, one foot in front of the other, and then just stay planted there and rest if that feels like a stretch. Like stretch, not break, right? Like, okay, sex metaphor, right? There's a stretch, like if let's say you're getting penetrated, right? There's a stretch that feels painful but also kind of good. Right? Like that's what I'm talking about here. But if it's just being like rammed in with zero lubrication or foreplay, like at least for me, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? You know what I mean? Like it's too much and it could create a breakage literally in the skin. That's kind of what I'm talking about here. But then there's some people that derive pleasure from that level of pain. And if that's you, then fucking go for it. But that ain't me. Part of being sort of this path of being authentic, like also whatever that means, right? The word authentic, is learning when to say, actually, my nervous system wants me to stop here. And I'm going to trust the fuck out of that.
Yes. Oh. Yes, I am so 1,000% there with all of my own stuff right now. Like that's part of where I'm at right now, is trusting that when my body is saying no, that's meaningful and not something that I need to just push through just because, right? Yeah. Like I think I love that all of this conversation about nervous system and the window of tolerance and building your capacity, all this stuff is awesome. And there's nothing wrong with the nervous system's built-in means of protection, right? Like I loved I think it was Deb Malkin, one of our mutual coach friends, posted the other day something about like, what if we didn't call it a trauma response, we called it a protection response? And I was like, yes.
So good.
Yeah, because to frame everything, not that obviously you're not doing this, but just in the general conversation, this idea that like, oh, trauma is bad, we need to fix it. Like, I loved what you were saying earlier about talking to the doubt, to the insecurity, being like, I'm sorry, I'm trying to fix you. That's part of my internal processes rely on things like that as well. Just like, this is a part of my experience, and I want to have the full human experience. Even just as a poet and songwriter, I want to have the full human experience, because otherwise my art won't be relatable. Like, I've thought about that. If I'm just riding the clouds all the time and like fully enlightened and not experiencing anything, I would write shit poetry.
Ugh, tell me about it.
Truly, like read Rumi. That shit is human.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And, bringing it back to like trauma responses too, right? Like that's another way that shame really just sneaks in so sneakily, is like, oh, when I finally heal, right? There's this Instagram page I found recently, and I think it's called Healing from Healing, but it really talks about like this sort of paradox that like when you make your entire life purpose like healing, it's really just shame in disguise, preventing you from living and enjoying where you're at in this moment, And one way that a lot of us do that is like vilifying, not in the villainera kind of way, but like making wrong a trauma response. Right? Like, but we've got to understand from a nervous system standpoint, a neural pathway within your body standpoint, if you push past trauma responses, the body is a physical thing. The mind is a physical thing. So a lot of people, when they think of thoughts and emotions, they think of like energies floating in the ether. Yes. And like understand that our capacity to feel those things within our body is because we have literally physical things called neural pathways within our nervous system, muscles with sensations and nerves that are physical containers. They're literally physical containers. So imagine there's like a lake in a forest, right? What a lot of people who are trying to push past trauma responses do and push past their comfort zone is like they're trying to flood that lake, but the lake hasn't even eroded enough to hold more water in it. What happens when you completely flood an ecosystem and it's not meant to be flooded? All the aliveness around it dies. All of it, like, animals drown, plants drown that aren't meant to have that much water, right? But I want you to imagine that over time, like weathering and erosion and putting a little bit more water into that lake starts to erode the rocks at the crevices. Maybe there's some openings, right? And there's a slow buildup over time. That lake can hold more water, and that water now generates life in the ecosystem. It's the same thing with our own bodies. Like, our body is so wise. If you're having a fight, flight, freeze response or anything like that, like, it's not a sign that you need to push through unless your nervous system consents to it. It's a sign to cultivate intimacy with yourself, go inward and ask if you're ready for more safety in that place. And if the answer is no, then that's wisdom. That's not something that needs to be fixed.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm feeling that so hard in my own life in the last couple of months with just my personal shit that's been happening and needing to take way more space and go slower. And I had this really interesting experience yesterday. I actually want to like say more about this at some point, but I realized I've actually incorporated and allowed and invited, I don't love the word procrastination, but I'm going to use it because people understand what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I have brought procrastination in as like a key part of my creative process. I not only don't push back against it, I'm like, this is like yesterday, the example I'm using is I had given myself a task. Because I trusted that I was going to do the task of that day, I was able to just wait until my brain was ready to do it, which wasn't until like 7 p.m., which is fine. So literally like, but it felt good because I was intentionally doing things that were nourishing to myself and doing things that felt good. And what's interesting, I'm just going to go back to the sex analogy for this with the nervous system capacity stuff, is I think when people are purchasing healing, so when they're buying, courses or coaching or therapy or whatever it is that they see as being, potentially healing, and there is an industry around it. So I want to acknowledge that like there's this, this used to be something that was just part of the community and that you received as by being a community member and that was not purchased. So that's a whole thing in itself. When people are in the healing economy and purchasing healing, there's this idea, I think, that the faster the better, and that sort of like the big, like the sexiest results are the fastest, the hardest, and it's almost like the orgy version. I love a good orgy, but honestly, like I don't do it that often anymore because I'm just like, it's not what I want all the time. Like there's a big part of me that, to like bring it back to my very first example, that like really gets a lot out of cultivating like my couple of main sexual relationships that I have right now, like with my kind of core partners, and that to use that like as an example, that's much more like the slow adding to the lake, growing the capacity. It's not that, like, it doesn't look as sexy as a result if you describe it from the outside, but on the inside, as an experience of just being able to love and appreciate my sexuality every day. I don't want to go to an orgy every day. I don't. I really, truly don't.
God, yeah, I can so relate to what you're saying, because during my depression phase, and to this day as well, like I still feel it, there has been a constricting in my sexual energy. Like it's like 30% as intense as before. And when this first started happening, I was like terrified. I was like, oh my God, like I'm never going to be horny again. I'm never going to feel the pleasure of an orgasm again. And I started really freaking out. And over time, and with continual going inward and continual learning to trust my body and learning to let go of freaking out at what my body's telling me, like I decided to see it as wisdom. And what I'm noticing is happening now is that what I used to be turned on by isn't really in resonance with who I'm becoming anymore. So,
Oh, that's really interesting.
right. So I used to be like subconsciously turned on by experiences that were actually kind of bad for me and not in service to me with people that don't actually give a shit about me or themselves. And now I'm finding that like those same people that used to really turn me on, like repulse me. And now I'm understanding that what's happening is a recalibration in my nervous system. It's like, okay, there's going to be a time period where you're feeling a lot less sexual energy, right? And this is sort of like a death that's happening inside the body. We're making space, we're taking out the trash in the nervous system and creating all this empty space, all this uncertainty. And then we're going to start helping you unplug from the neural pathways of pleasure with shitty people. Plug and start to plug that into deriving pleasure and sensual energy from things that you normally didn't before that are actually super generative and nurturing, right? To you in this season of life. What I'm not saying is it's bad for you to hook up, and like I'm not saying that. I love a good hookup, y'all. Hello. Right? It's just right now, what's happening is that the parts of my nervous system that are in tune and connected with like the sex hormones and things like that are starting to point in a different direction that I'm not used to. And the process of transitioning into that takes a lot of energy. Again, nerves are physical things inside the body. It actually takes calories to build neural pathways, right? Like, it's not just floating thoughts in the ether, or maybe it is that, and right? But like, yeah, I felt reminded of that when you said what you just said.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned seasons, or sort of like the season of your life. And that is another thing. I mean, also literally we're in, a changing season right now. And I was just in Vermont for a week. So I was like, oh yeah, I actually kind of love being cold a little bit. I know you're Miami, right? So yeah.
The seasons here are hot and hotter.
Yeah. But I actually for me, there is something about especially winter, that I like having that experience of my energy changing, even though it certainly doesn't align with the capitalist work week of, historically, where, you just do the same thing year in, year out with no change. But for me, I know, and I'm like excited about my sort of like winter turning inward and, spending more time. And actually it's interesting because I do find as well that my overall sexual energy, what I notice seasonally, one thing that happens is that it turns more toward creativity. Like my creative energy and my sexual energy are very related. It almost feels like they're the same.
Literally, yeah.
Yeah.
Same.
And so I will sometimes notice I'm not as literally sex or orgasm oriented when I'm very, very creatively inspired and creating a lot. Like I'll be more in my head, or even more like, I don't know, in the ether, as you're saying, like in those creative, just kind of like generative places, but it all feels generative and it all feels good. And then in the spring, I always, it turns back to like pure horniness.
But yes, as it should. No, I'm kidding. But like, yeah, it's. I resonate a lot with what you're saying too about like, there's times where I feel physiologically turned on creating art or creating content, even though the content isn't sexual, right? So yeah, I resonate so much with what you're saying about. Sometimes it feels like the creativity and sexual energy is similar and one and the same. Definitely, when I've had great sex, for the next few days, y'all, like, watch out! I might make a shit ton of money. I might make a viral video. I could track that's happened quite a few times, and no one's talking about this really, like, or there's a very small, because a lot of people are talking about what they think they should be.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people they're like, it's true, the word sex is going to get censored more on Instagram, on TikTok, and there are ways to take the risk and to fight for a world where it's safer to talk about these things and not punished. And part of that hero's journey of sort of creating a new normal is being willing to be the person that's seen as abnormal until it's normal, whatever that even means. And like, and so many people have gifts of intuition and spirituality, but they're trying to sound really sciencey when they're not, or they have gifts with the sexual energy and ways of experiencing it that people don't even know they want until they've heard about it. And like, but the world's not going to know because hiding is more pedestalized, or following this rule book is more pedestalized. Like, fuck that. The reason these rule books existed was because someone stood for something enough until it was normal. So like, why not, like, at least me, I'm standing for like, okay, a world where it's safer to share our opinions, even if we disagree, a world where it's safer to take up space and play around with clothing and talk about sex, so that it's not like everything that's sexual is filtered through shame. And when things are filtered through shame, like the chances of it being destructive rather than generative are like way higher, at least in my experience and the experiences of my clients. But like sex, if we were to talk about sex in particular, it's like so many people feel so much shame around their sexual energy, and the sexual energy is still there. No matter how much you try and inject shame into it, it's still there. It's going to move. So you can either move it by putting yourself in dangerous situations. Like I've seen people riddled by shame with their own sexuality, that it turns into like addiction to substances and putting themselves in dangerous, risky situations with sex, and leaving them feeling depleted and empty after, because they're unwilling to hold that energy or to question the voice that says that this is wrong,
Yeah. That also makes me think of actually another way that I experience that energy is being like what you were just saying about like being able to or willing to hold it. I actually love that comparison with money and with creative energy, because it totally makes sense. As you're saying, people don't really talk about this like sexual energy / making money connection? Of course they don't, because we don't talk about either of those things. We also don't tend to talk about, or like, it's not a lot of artists, if they're talking about their process publicly, they're more talking about it from a like, let me show you my studio and show you the beautiful content I'm supposed to be making so that people will buy my art. Thank you. That kind of stuff, versus the just absolute like laying flat face down on the floor, hating absolutely everything you've ever written part of it. And to me, all of those are interlocking. And where I started that idea, and where I thankfully remember to come back around to, is that, for example, if I'm feeling a sexual urge, I work at home. It's usually pretty easy for me to meet that need within minutes if I need to, right? But something that because I've noticed that connection with the creative energy, something I've played with is actually holding that, just holding the sort of horniness or creative energy, kind of like riding that energy and seeing where it wants to go, and not just immediately dissipating it.
Ooh. Let's see how much time you got, because that's a whole another 3 hours right there. No, yo, that is so juicy. And I'm also playing with that in my own way as well. Is like, actually, I did, so not this year, but the year before, there's this trend, I don't know if you've heard of it, called No Nut November. And it's essentially a month where you don't watch porn or orgasm, right? And I led for free, like a little group chat, a bunch of like male identifying individuals that can like orgasm in that way. I led a group, and so the idea for me wasn't about suppressing sexual energy. It was about moving it in a different way, which was a disclaimer that I also gave to the group. It's like, if you want to self-pleasure, fine, but let's experiment just for 30 days with not releasing it, right? And what I discovered was so fucking mind-blowing. And this was by accident. I didn't even know that this was possible. It was hard, pun intended, like challenging. It was actually super challenging to do. And I would have these self-pleasure sort of ceremonies. But I started doing this thing because in that year, when I used to like self-pleasure, it was very like, arrive to the destination as quickly as possible, probably watch some porn, right? Like zero in my body, more so in my head, right? But in that situation, I was sort of forced by the circumstance to be more creative. And I started lighting candles, putting on mood lighting, putting on playlists. I started touching different parts of my body. I've discovered erogenous zones in places I didn't even know you could feel like erogenous energy. I had this experience where I was like having a self-pleasure. Oh, and I even bought a bunch of toys, right? Like, which I wasn't using before. So it was like, I had this experience where I was exploring my body in this way. And I had, for the first time ever, an orgasm without nutting as a man. And it was the most mind-boggling feeling ever. And while this was happening, I literally saw it looked like a psychedelic vision. Like, it looked like something I would see if I was on LSD. Like, but I saw, and I was sober, I saw my future self standing right in front of me, looking into my eyes, and he's like, I fucking love you. He just says that. And I just started sobbing, like, and shaking and sobbing, and I felt like a god. Like, and that has happened to me quite a few times. And I started experimenting with like, okay, what if I set an intention before I have a casual encounter with like a hookup or a friends with benefits? What if I also put music and candles and lighting for them as well? What if while I was having sex with them, I was saying like affirmations in my head? And I started exploring this side of, not that you have to, I'm not saying you have to do that, but, and I started also like, instead of being in my head visualizing while having sex, I would take an elevator, back to that exercise of rain earlier in the podcast. I would take an elevator to the middle of that sensation in my genitalia, in my nips, in my armpits, wherever I'm feeling that erotic energy. And I would go into that feeling and expand it. And whew, what I'm telling you, it changed my life. It did. Like, it did. And there were times where I would get the biggest creative ideas in my business after those experiences, or I would take bigger risks and I would say bolder things, or I would make money. And I believe in magic. I believe that shit was fucking magic. So how interesting is it to me that an energy that is so powerful, like sexual energy, like we're taught in every system in society, like to suppress it or to feel shame around it. It's because anything that's filtered through the lens of shame is diluted. It's like fast food versus 5-star food. It's like, you know, it's you're diluting the potency of that energy by putting like shame on top of it. And sexual energy, literally the energy that brings life into the world, the energy for some people like us, it's also associated with art and creativity. Like, you know, who benefits from that energy being suppressed is another question that we can even ask ourselves. So it's like, understand that if you're someone listening to this right now and you feel shame around sex, sexuality, sexual energy, if you think you're hypersexual and you need to be less sexual, like whose voice is that? Is it yours? Or is it mom's, dad's, the Catholic Church? Is it the homophobic voices, you know, queer-phobic voices? Is it really you? Is it the voice that represents love in your body, right? Or does every time that voice comes up, your body constricts, right? That constriction is wisdom. It's trying to tell you, this ain't mine.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so good. Yeah. And I think a lot about, because the who benefits, obviously most of our systems of power, especially the most extractive ones, they fare the best when we are powerless and depressed and, you know, just seeking to alleviate just enough, you know, to like function in the world. And I really, like, if we had no shame and if we had all the time and resources to be in flow and make the art we want to make, or whatever, you know, not everybody wants to make art, but like if we were able to create what we wanted to create without shame, express our sexuality or lack thereof without shame, if all of these things were true, I don't think we would buy as much stuff, you know, like in general, you know, there's like, if our deep core human desires were just easily met, it would immediately break down at least the fast fashion industry.
Mm,
And
yeah. Yeah, I haven't thought about it like that before of like how it could be related to buying things. Sometimes though, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, like the sensation when like about to buy something, but it's almost like it's there's a texture to it that doesn't feel super clean. It's like I'm like leaking energy or I'm like nutting by buying this thing, but it's like not intentional. Not that every nut needs to be intentional, by the way. I'm not saying that either. It's more of like a way of numbing sensation
mhm,
rather than saying yes to an item that's a fuck yes for you, right?
yeah,
So I'd be curious to like just track where that's happening for me.
yeah. And that's a whole other like huge thing we could go down.
Oh yeah.
So good. Yay. So I do want to start wrapping up. My final questions for you are where people can find you, and then if you have advice that you want to give yourself at any age.
That's good. I'll start with the advice one. Okay. I would like take a time machine to like me that was in high school and be like, trust me, bestie. Literally everyone you think is gonna hate you for liking boys is gonna be even more obsessed with you. Like, it's safe. And that's not always the case for everybody. For some people, if you come out, it will put you in danger. So filter that through your own discernment. But this is for me to me, right? It's safe. And it's more fun. And we eventually get to the point where like, because I used to be like when I first came out, I was like, oh, like I accept myself for being gay, but I'd rather be straight. Like there was like layers to it. But now I'm at the point where I'm like, ew, why would anyone want to be straight? Like being straight is so boring. Okay, so yeah, we've gotten to that point. Yeah. So where can people find me? Instagram at Carlos DelaPlaya, Facebook Carlos DelaPlaya, Twitter DelaPlaya Carlos because some asshole took Carlos DelaPlaya, and TikTok Carlitos DelaPlaya. And I think you're gonna put my podcast on the show notes, but it's called the Spiritual Thirst Trap Podcast. So check that out.
Yeah, we will put all of those in the show notes so people can easily find you. Yay. Oh, this has been so great. I feel very energized and like very excited.
Me too. This was actually, it's so funny. I say this almost every podcast that I do. It's probably because the skill of me of being even more myself as I do these is getting stronger. But like, this has been the most fun one I've ever done. And the most unfiltered. I think this one has the most, like there were moments where I was like, do I want to say that? Yeah, I do. And that hasn't happened yet. So wow.
Nice. That's what I aim to bring out in people.
Yeah, and it worked.
Yay. Yeah, I think this definitely has the most explicit sexual references, which is unsurprising. I guess I should have expected that because I've listened to your podcast.
There we go. Yes.
Yay. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll put all this stuff in the show notes and definitely look up Carlos and definitely listen to his podcast. If you liked this, you will be obsessed. So thank you so much. And I will see you later. Thanks for listening. If you know someone who would be helped by this podcast, please share it with them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions at mattia@mattiamauree.com. That's MATTIA@MATTIAMAUREE.com. Thank you.